Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you here tonight. We're really happy to be able to have this opportunity to share with you all a little bit more information about our aviation program here at JU. So I'm going to get us started, and I'm going to lead us off in what I typically do if we were doing this information session in person. So I will just go through and I'll kind of give you just a brief overview, and then we'll get right into it. Typically, I start by just giving some information about the different majors that we offer in aviation. Then we will go into, I will tell you all about what happens out at the airport. Then we'll talk a little bit about what happens on campus within the College of Business. We'll talk about the different aviation clubs that we offer. We'll talk about the airline partnerships that we have. And then we will talk a little bit about the degree, the information packet, which includes the degree guide. And we'll go through each of those pages in a little bit more detail. And then we'll have time for some questions. So I just want to give you all an overview so you know what to expect. So I'll jump right into the different majors that we offer. We have two different majors that you can pursue within the aviation program. The first is aviation management and flight operations, and the second is aviation management. So for prospective students that are interested in flying, you would be under the aviation management and flight operations degree. We also call those students our AVO degree students. And we have 4 tracks underneath that AVO degree option. The most common track, the one that's most popular, is the commercial pilot track, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that a little bit later. We also have an international track, and that's for international students. And then we have 2 ROTC tracks. We have the Navy ROTC track and the Marine ROTC track. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a little bit as well. And then for our aviation management major, those students do not fly typically, but they have 3 different tracks within that major that they can pursue. There's the air traffic control track, the airline management track, and then the airport management track. And some students will pursue just one track within aviation management. We have some students that are interested in pursuing all 3 tracks, and we strongly encourage, if that's of interest to you, to go ahead and pursue all 3 of those tracks. So I'm going to jump right into what happens out at the airport. Usually students that are interested in flight operations have a lot of questions about that. So I'm going to jump right into that. We do all of our flight training out at Craig Airport. It's also known as Jacksonville Executive Airport. It's about 15 to 20 minutes east of campus. We, as a university, do not provide transportation from campus to the airport. So we do recommend that students bring their own car to campus so that they can get back and forth to the airport. Students are allowed to have cars on campus as freshmen. And if you guys come to campus and do the campus tour, you'll learn that students can also have boats on campus, even as freshmen. But if you're able to bring a car, we do encourage that. If you're not able to bring a car, we always have some students each semester that don't have a car, and we're able to work out carpools with other students that are in the same flight block time frame that you have. So it's not a deal breaker to not have a car, but if you do have one, it's nice to have it just so that you're not relying on anyone else to get back and forth to the airport. L3 Harris is our flight training provider. They've been our flight training provider for quite some time. We've had a relationship with this group for almost 30 years. We've had a few name changes throughout that time, but we've had that same relationship throughout those years. L3, you all may have heard that L3 is in the process of changing to another name, and so that is happening sometime in the future. We're not quite sure. So at this point, I will continue to call them L3 Harris. In the past, it has not meant very much of a change to our day-to-day operations whatsoever. So we don't anticipate that happening with this change as well. In the past, we've just had, a new logo on the flight shirt and a new logo on the paperwork. And that's what we anticipate with this change as well. So, but we'll continue to call them L3 Harris for now. So L3 has a larger program in Sanford, Florida. And then they have this smaller, not too much smaller, but slightly smaller program up here in Jacksonville. The campus in Sanford, the students that are doing flight training there are only pursuing flight training. They're not working on a degree or affiliated with a college or a university, where the students in Jacksonville, currently all the students that are flying in Jacksonville are Jacksonville University students that are flying with L3. So L3, as our flight training provider, they own all of our aircraft. They maintain our aircraft. The heavy maintenance for the aircraft happens in Sanford, Florida. We do light maintenance up here in Jacksonville, Florida. And then L3 also employs all of our flight instructors. And that's an important thing that I like to bring up, because a lot of students, as they progress and get to the end of their training here, they like to go on and be flight instructors. And so that's certainly something that students can do. I just like to point out that to do that, you need to interview and be hired by L3. You would not be employed by JU as a flight instructor. As long as you're a good student and you go through your ratings in a timely manner, you shouldn't have any issues with interviewing and being hired by L3. Quite a few of our students do continue and go on and flight instruct at L3. So I would say probably 60 to 65% of our flight instructors right now are either L3 or JU graduates, or they're still JU students in flight instructing. We fly Cessna 172s and Piper Seminoles. All the aircraft that we fly have the glass flight deck, so they all have the G1000. And that's a nice thing that they both have the same navigation system. So as you transition from that Cessna 172 single engine to the multi-engine Piper Seminole, you've got that same navigation system. So that kind of helps ease that transition a little bit. Students always ask about flight blocks and how flight blocks work. So students are assigned 3 flight blocks per week. Flight blocks are either Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday. And then you have your 3rd flight block on Friday or Saturday. We have flex days on Fridays and Saturdays. And we switched to flex days last fall. And there's a few reasons that we did that. One reason was the university as a whole went to a 4-day week. So in general, as a student at JU, you will typically have classes only Monday through Thursday. There will be some classes that you will take that will meet on Fridays. For example, I know some foreign language classes meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I also know that there's some classes that meet Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as a hybrid, but that Friday class is usually an asynchronous meeting. And even within aviation, there's aviation physics is one class that our students take. One of the sections meets Monday, Wednesday, and the lab is on Friday. But outside of those examples, the majority of your classes are Monday through Thursday. So when that change happened with the university, we worked together with L3 and thought that it would be a good idea to start using flex days. So what flex days does is, instead of having every flight block and every airplane scheduled all day long, Friday and Saturday, like it is the other 4 days, on Friday and Saturdays, that day is opened up. And that allows dispatch to schedule longer flights like check rides or solo flights or cross countries, anything that takes a longer period of time. So that's really helpful to have that flexibility on those days for the dispatcher to be able to schedule those. Another positive to having the flex days is that students can be moved around a little bit. So for those of you who are familiar with Florida, we have thunderstorms often in the summertime. Most afternoons we have thunderstorms, and our summer lasts really until about mid-October or early November. It's still pretty warm and we still get thunderstorms in the afternoons. So if you had a flight block that was for Monday, Wednesday, 1 to 3 in the fall, there's a good chance you're going to get rained out every now and then. And so the computer system has an algorithm that tracks how much students are flying. And dispatch can look at that and see those students that haven't been able to fly maybe for weather that week. And then dispatch can make note of those students and go ahead and schedule those students, for example, maybe Friday morning at 9 a.m. That way they're getting that student a flight block right away, and they're doing it in the morning outside of that typical weather time. And then if there's availability, the dispatch will work to get students a second block that weekend as well. Let's see. Now, in talking to my students, most of my students have said that if they have a flight block like Monday, Wednesday, 1 to 3, they can kind of expect that it will typically probably be Friday, 1 to 3, but it's because it's flexible. That means the students have to be flexible too, and the dispatchers will schedule them as they need to try to accommodate everyone. So the schedule for Friday and Saturday comes out Thursday at 5 p.m. So students know to check and see on Thursday at 5 p.m. when they're going to be flying for the weekend. I always get questions also on how flight blocks are assigned, and if you're an incoming student, like for example, next fall, will you get a flight block or not? And so I would just want to answer a couple of those questions. Flight blocks are assigned based on seniority. So if you're a current student, we just went through flight block registration. Students are able to register for flight blocks based on how many credit hours they have. So seniors get to register first, and then it goes down the line. For incoming students, for example, for next fall, those students are put into line for a flight block based on 2 different factors. One of them is the date that they put down their deposit. And then the second factor is the date that the student completes the course registration. So as soon as a student is admitted to the university, they can put down a deposit. So we strongly encourage students, if you feel like JU is the right fit for you, to go ahead and put that deposit down, so that helps secure your spot. And then for fall, students being admitted in the fall, in March, we will be sending out a course registration sheet. And as soon as the student provides that information and sends that back, that in combination with the date that the student put the deposit down is how the students will be put in line for a flight block in the fall. We have a lot of students right now, and so the last few years we've had large incoming classes, and we have been able to provide those new students with flight blocks each fall. We don't anticipate being able to do that this fall. We do anticipate that we will be full this fall, and so we will have some students that may not get a flight block right away in the fall. They may not get a flight block until the winter term or potentially even spring semester. So we do want to encourage students to put down that deposit and then also fill out that course registration sheet as early as possible. I think we can go ahead and move on, and we'll talk a little bit about the College of Business. So kind of moving back to campus, we're part of the Davis College of Business and Technology. I think this is an important thing to point out because your degree is not just an aviation degree, it's also a business degree. And that's why it has the aviation management in the name. You take a significant number of business classes to earn this degree. And I think that helps set our students apart from other aviation students. As most of you know, if something happens to you health-wise and you are no longer able to maintain a medical certificate, you are not able to continue flying. But having that business background gives you something to fall back on that enables you to, to have something else to do that you have expertise in. Also, having that business background is helpful even if you do maintain your medical certificate and you are at an airline or a large corporate flight department and you would like to go into management or go into the flight training department. Having that business background, I think, helps set you apart from your peers. So I think that it's a huge positive. If you're interested in taking more business classes, that is also something that's possible. There's a lot of different minors that students can look at within the College of Business, and most of those minors are not that many additional classes. It's usually just 3 to 4 additional classes to add a minor. Like, for example, a finance minor is 4 additional classes. So that's something that, if that's of interest to you, that's a good thing to take a look at. We also offer a few graduate programs, one of them being a master's in business administration. And so that's something that students can pursue after they finish their bachelor's degree. They can do that 2-year MBA program at the end of their bachelor's degree. Or if students are interested, they can become part of the grad to grad program. So that would mean that students start taking graduate level courses as an undergraduate, and they're able to finish their bachelor degree as well as their graduate degree in 5 years. So I know that may seem very far off for many of you, but I just like to point out that those options are available, and that's something that might be of interest to some of you. We are a fairly small program. Right now we have about 340 students total. About 70 of those students are aviation management students, and about 270 of the students are aviation management and flight operations students. We currently have 6 full-time professors, and we have about 6 adjunct professors right now as well. I think the students, because we're on the smaller side, I think the students get to know all of us pretty well. We get to know the students well. We know if a student is not coming to class, we notice that right away. We notice if a student's grade starts to drop. We also know good things about our students. We know if they have a check ride coming up, and we'll ask them how their check ride went, or we know if they have an event coming up, like for the flight team, or something else that they're involved in, a sport they might be in. We'll ask them about that. So I think we have a really good camaraderie within our program, where the professors are looking out for the students, and I think the students feel pretty close to most of the professors. All of our professors have real world experience, so everybody comes from some part of the industry, which makes, I think, makes the discussions in the classroom a lot more interesting. Right now we have 3 retired Delta Airlines captains. We have 1 retired American Airlines captain. Captain Tui, our director, who you saw earlier, he retired from the Navy. He flew in the Navy for almost 30 years and retired as commander of a ship. We have Dr. Stevenson, who retired from the Marines. He was a helicopter pilot in the Marines. For our adjunct professors, our air traffic control professor is a retired air traffic controller. Our aviation law professor is a current aviation attorney. Our weather professor has a PhD in meteorology. And then we have some adjunct professors that help in our CRJ 700 simulator. One of them is a current first officer for FedEx, and he he lives in Jacksonville and likes to fly with the students on his days off, so he helps out in the simulator. And then we have 2 alumni that are not helping this semester, but we hope to have back, that also live in Jacksonville, but fly professionally. And that's really great for the students to have those connection points. Let's see, so I mentioned the CRJ simulator. I'll talk a little bit more about that, and then I'll talk about our Redbird simulators. The CRJ 700 simulator that we have is a class that all seniors have the opportunity to take. It's part of our curriculum, so they're required to take it. But it's a class that they all love to take. They're very excited to take. It's an 8-week class. It's called AVO 432, or Jet Transition Training. And students are paired with a flight partner, and they have a professor with them. And the students go through training just like the training that they're going to receive when they get to a regional airline, or when if they go to a corporate flight department and they're working on getting a type rating with at Flight Safety or one of those places. It's the exact same training that they'll receive. So the students get to do normal procedures, they get to do emergency procedures, they do instrument approaches, and then they spend the majority of their time doing loft training, which is line-oriented flight training. And that's the exact same type of training that the students will have down the road when they get a little bit farther, either at a regional airline or at a corporate flight department. So the students trade off being the captain and the first officer, and they have a great time, lots of fun in that simulator. And then we have Redbird simulators on campus in the College of Business that are available to our students. We have 4 Cessna 172 simulators, and we have 1 Piper Seminole simulator that we just got this fall. All those simulators we received through grants, and so we don't charge our students to use those simulators on campus. We pass that savings that we received through that grant, we pass that savings right on to our students. Most universities do charge for those simulators, so I always like to point that out. But the simulators are available to our students anytime. If it's during the business week, students can just come to any one of us and we can unlock the door for them. If it's outside of normal business hours, they just have to let us know ahead of time and we can set up with security so that security can have the simulator room unlocked for the students. So the students will go into the simulators sometimes on their own, sometimes with one of our aviation tutors, which I'll talk about that in just a minute. And the students can practice maneuvers. They can go through checklists, they can go through flows, they can chair fly. If they're working on their instrument rating, they can practice instrument approaches, and sometimes they'll have a tutor come with them and act like air traffic control and give them clearances. So they're really a great opportunity for students to practice what they're learning at the airport and help prepare for their next flight. Students will be in the Cessna 172 simulators for one of the classes that we offer. It's AVS 103, or Introduction to Aviation Automation. And students are in the classroom for the majority of the semester of that class, but the last 3 weeks of the semester, the students are in the Cessna 172 simulators. So the simulators are a great resource, and we strongly encourage students to use the simulators, as much as they would like. I mentioned the aviation tutors, and I think that's something that is unique to our program, but something that we feel like is a huge benefit to our students. Every college on campus at JU has tutors, but we have tutors that are specific just to aviation. The tutors are free to our students, so students can use them as much as they would like to without being charged at all. The tutors are paid. They're paid out of the aviation budget, though. So the tutors really offer the students just a tremendous opportunity to review and to prepare. I see students in our conference room mainly working with tutors, and they often are going over something for a test for a class that they have, a test that they have coming up. They'll ask questions about and have the tutors help prepare them. If a student has to miss a class, the tutor can review with them the material that they missed. And the big thing I see students working with tutors is when they're getting ready for a check ride. And the tutors can sit with the students and they will ask them questions for 2 hours, just like a check airman would, and just give them a typical mock oral exam, just like the check airman would. So the tutors are a huge benefit. I'm going to move on just a little bit. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about some of the clubs that we have for aviation. We have hundreds of clubs on campus for JU, but for aviation, we have 5 specifically. So I will just go through those kind of briefly. The picture that you see here in this slide is the JU Student Organization Fair, the Aviation Organization Fair. We had that the second week of classes this fall, and we'll have another one the second week of classes this spring. And it's just a great way for students to get a chance to walk around and talk to the different leaders of the organizations and find different ways to get involved within those organizations. So I'll tell you briefly about them. One of them is Alpha Eta Rho. That is our aviation fraternity. It's a professional co-ed fraternity. You can still be in a social fraternity or sorority. But Alpha Eta Rho is a great organization. Most people that go through a collegiate aviation program are part of Alpha Eta Rho, and so they have a huge alumni network. So once you join Alpha Eta Rho, you can go online and find someone who's doing what you would like to do down the road and ask them to be your mentor. They have a great mentor program, and they also have a great scholarship program. They also have a conference in the spring, and we send students there. Sometimes we weren't able to this year, but we did last year. And the students get a lot out of that conference as well. Another one of our organizations is the JU Flight Team. This is a really fun organization. Students love being a part of this team. The flight team, we are part of the Southeast region. So we compete against schools in the Southeast like Embry-Riddle, Polk, Auburn, Broward, FIT. And we typically have a regional competition in the fall. And then the top three teams from the regional competition go on to the national competition in the spring. So last year, we placed third in the regional competition, and then we went on to the national competition. Last year, it was in Wisconsin in May. This year, because of the hurricane, typically the competition's in Lakeland. The competition's been changed a little bit, and we're doing a few smaller competitions throughout the region. So we have not heard the results of that quite yet, but we will keep you guys posted. But I know our team was intending to go to the national competition again this year. So it's a lot of fun. Students compete in ground events and flying events, and they just have a great time. So it's a great group. The next three groups that are listed, you don't have to meet the demographic to be part of the group. So we have lots of people that are part of the group that maybe don't quite meet the demographic. One of those groups is the Latino Pilots Association. This group just formed again this fall, and they are going strong. They just had their last meeting of the semester last night. And so that's a really great group. They had a conference in Orlando in September. We had a few students go to that. And they also have great mentor and scholarship program. Another organization is OBAP, or the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. That group, again, similar, has a great mentor and scholarship program. And they also have a conference. This year, the conference was in Memphis in August. And then lastly, we have Women in Aviation. We have many guys that are part of Women in Aviation, and I strongly encourage everyone to become a part of Women in Aviation. Last year, we had a conference in Orlando, and we had 30 students attend, and 9 of which were guys. This year, the conference is in Denver in March, so we'll probably not have quite as many students be able to attend, but we encourage students to come and be a part of it. The Conference for Women in Aviation is an opportunity where you get to walk into this exhibit hall, and every commercial airline, every large corporate flight department, every branch of the military, huge companies like Boeing and Gulfstream, they're all there, and you have an opportunity to walk up and talk to them. So it's very rare to have that opportunity, and it's a great way to network and meet people. And then moving on, I just want to touch a little bit on the airline partnerships that we have. So we have 2 formal partnerships. We used to have a third, which was with Endeavor Airlines, and that is now part of the Delta Propel program. So that that has gone away. Prior to this summer, if you were part of the Delta Propel program, you could get to Delta through any regional airline, and that changed this summer. And now the path to Delta through the Propel program is only with Endeavor Airlines. So when that happened, the Endeavor program went away. It's it was known as STEP, or Student to Endeavor Pilot. So we have Delta Propel, and then we have the JetBlue Gateway program. So those are our 2 main partnerships. We have representatives from Delta here on campus at JU all the time. At least twice a month, they're here talking with students, interacting with students. They do donuts with Delta, which is just what it sounds like. They have donuts for our students in the lobby of the building, and they're there to answer questions and talk with students. They will also do presentations in our classrooms. Delta will, every semester, they have a more formal presentation where they talk about the Propel program. And that's a wonderful opportunity for freshmen and sophomore students to learn more about the program and understand what is required of them so that they can apply and be hired into the program as a junior or a senior. They did something kind of cool last year. Last March, Delta brought this grill that they have, and this was pretty exciting. You guys can probably find pictures of this on social media, but they brought this huge grill that was like a mock-up fuselage of an aircraft, and it was big. It weighed 3,200 pounds. And they parked it in the parking lot behind the College of Business. And then when you opened up the sides of the fuselage, there were grills. And so then the pilots were out there grilling hamburgers and hot dogs for us. So that was a lot of fun. And so we're hoping they bring that back soon. And then in terms of our partnership with JetBlue, they are also an excellent partner for us. They are here often. They're here usually at least twice a semester. Both Delta and JetBlue were part of our career fair that we hosted in September. And then JetBlue usually has some pilots that will come and meet with the students and talk to them in the lobby of the College of Business. I think we have 4 alumni that live in Jacksonville that are first officers at JetBlue right now. So they're very big part of that program and come to campus and talk to our students. And if students have interviews with JetBlue to become part of that University Gateway program, those pilots are more than happy to talk to the students and help prepare them for that process. I mentioned the career fair. We had a career fair in September for just for our aviation students, and we will continue to have that career fair every fall for our students. We had lots of different potential employers there for students to get a chance to talk to and meet with. In addition to Delta and JetBlue, we had Cape Air was there. We also had Republic Airlines. We had Piedmont Airlines, PSA. We had an air traffic controller who was also an alumni that was there. And then we also had the Jacksonville Aviation Authority. They oversee the 5 largest airports in Jacksonville, and they are a tremendous partner. They offer internships to numerous students every year, but a lot of our students are able to earn those internship opportunities as well. And we had 3 students that were interns with the Jacksonville Aviation Authority just this summer. We have lots of other relationships with other airlines and also with other folks in the aviation industry. A couple slides ago, there was a picture of someone talking, and that was someone who is a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. He flew the SR-71 Blackbird, so he came and spoke to the students this semester. We typically do a call with American Airlines, a virtual event with American Airlines once throughout the year. We have a virtual event planned with Alaska and Horizon this year. We also have one planned with UPS. They have a great internship program, so we typically do a virtual event with them. We have an American Airlines captain coming to speak to the students next semester. So we try to put our students in front of as many different people as possible, so they get an opportunity to talk to these different folks in the industry, learn about the different companies, and really get a feel for what the right fit is for them, where they want to go, and what would be a good fit for them. So we try to help encourage our students to grow those relationships as much as possible. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about the information packet that you guys have. So you should all have one, and we'll just kind of go through that packet. I mainly usually just talk about if I was giving you this in person, there's an insert. So I usually mainly talk about that, but you guys can kind of go through it as I'm talking. One thing I like to point out is our degree guide, and we'll get to that in just a second. But this slide is showing you an example of what classes typically would look like for our first year students. So just to give you an idea, kind of pulling out of that degree guide that is in your packet, giving you an opportunity to take a look at the different classes that are available and that you would typically be scheduled for. So if you're a student coming in and you do not have any previous flight training experience, then you start out in our private pilot ground school and private pilot lab A. And so you are flying right away first semester, and those are the two classes that you definitely would take. Then we typically see students take either Introduction to Aviation Automation, which I talked about before. That's where you are in the simulator the last few weeks of class. And then typically students will take a couple of different core classes. And those core classes are listed on the first page of the degree guide. Those are pretty straightforward. Some universities call them general education requirements. We call them core curriculum here at JU, but it's pretty typical of what you'd see at most universities. We do request that students, or we don't request, but students are required to take one fine arts class because we're a liberal arts institution. And then in the spring semester, students would go on to Private Pilot Lab B, and then Aviation Weather, typically if they haven't taken that, if they didn't take that in the first semester. And then those next three classes that are listed are also part of the core curriculum that is needed. And then depending on how you're doing in your flight training, you may move on and take instrument ground school your second semester. We encourage students to do that if they're moving through their flight training at a fairly rapid pace and they want to continue, then you want to take instrument ground school. Where some students, I'd say about half the students, decide to wait and do their instrument rating their second year as a sophomore. And if that's the case, then we encourage those students to wait and take instrument ground school as a sophomore. A couple things I just wanted to touch on within the degree guide. That first page is the core curriculum that I mentioned. That second page lists all the business classes that you'll be taking. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of business classes to this degree. You'll be taking accounting, econ, statistics. And then that second column on that second page starts going into all the different classes that you take for the commercial pilot track. And then the commercial pilot track wraps up on the third page, that first column. That's the end of it. If you are an international student and you're interested in that international track, that's kind of specific to a certain type of international student that's on a certain program, but we can talk that through with you. And then the last page of the degree guide just looks at the ROTC tracks. So just briefly, in case we've got some folks that are interested in the ROTC tracks, the big difference between the commercial pilot track and the ROTC tracks is that with the commercial pilot track, you get all your ratings. So you get your private pilot instrument, commercial multi, commercial single, flight instructor, and flight instructor instrument. If you're doing the ROTC track, you stop your flight training after the commercial multi-engine track. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them being that you can see here on this degree guide, you're taking a lot of naval science classes. So you need a space to fill those naval science classes. And another reason being that if you're planning and your intent is to go into the military to fly, you don't need to continue your flight training beyond that commercial multi-engine rating. When you go into the military, then if you're assigned a flight slot that first day, they're going to say, this isn't, lesson one, this is an airplane. So you don't need to continue to invest in more flight training because they're going to start you off with flight training. And then also you don't need that flight instructor certificate because typically if you are able to fly in the military, by the time you finish your time in the military, you have enough flight time to go directly to a major airline. Occasionally someone may need to go to a regional airline for a little bit, but typically there's enough to go directly to a major airline. Okay, I think our next section talks about FAQs. So I'm going to answer a couple of these. There's a lot of questions in this FAQ section, so you guys can read through those and look at those. I try to cover most of them in this info session, but I'll just touch on these. So one of them is, if I'm coming in with my associate's degree, I don't have any flight training, will I be done with my AVO degree in 2 years? And that is, the answer to that question is yes, you can be, but it may take you longer than that. The real answer is that it's honestly up to you. We have students that students are able to fly at their pace. So we have had students come in and start flight training, and we've had some students come in, like for example, with a private pilot, and they start on instrument and they complete all their ratings within 1 year. And so it certainly can be done. Now, I will say those students are the outliers, but as long as you're dedicated and willing to spend that time to put in, you certainly can get through those ratings in a shorter period of time. Most of you probably know this, but just in case you don't, the restricted ATP is something that we offer that you receive once you complete your training and your degree here at our university. And so the ATP is the airline transport license. Typically, to qualify for your ATP, you have to have 1,500 hours of flight time and be 23 years of age. But if you qualify for the restricted ATP, you can get that restricted ATP at 1,000 hours of flight time and 21 years of age. So we'd like to point that out because that's important. That means that you can potentially move on to a regional airline at only 1,000 hours of flight time versus 1,500 hours of flight time. So that kind of leads into this next question is, once you graduate, can you go right to an airline? Typically, no. Typically, students will graduate or finish their flight training with about 250 to 300 hours. And then the students will, most of the time, will flight instruct to build up their flight time from that 250-hour mark up to that 1,000-hour mark. This leads into the next question. After graduation, most ABOs start work as a flight instructor to build up that flight time. Flight instruction time is the time that airlines seem to like that experience the most, but that is not what you have to do. There's other ways to build up your flight time and get paid for it. You can tow banners, you can fly skydivers, you can do aerial mapping or aerial photography, you can do pipeline patrol. So there's lots of other ways that you can build up your flight time, but the airlines seem to like the experience that instructors receive as a flight instructor, because not just is every day different, but every single flight is different. And the flight instructors need to, not only really know their stuff because they're teaching it, but they also need to be able to change the way that they teach and the way that they talk based on the student. And so they develop really good interpersonal skills, and the airlines really appreciate that experience. All right, so we're going to move on to the next slide then. The next page also in your packet talks about medical certificates. I'd just like to touch on this briefly. You're only required to have a third-class medical certificate to start your flight training, but we strongly encourage our students to get a first-class medical certificate. You will need a first-class medical certificate to fly for an airline or to get a type rating. So you want to make sure that you qualify for that first-class medical. You don't want to do all of this training and get to the end and try to apply for a first-class medical only to find out that you don't qualify. Sometimes also you may qualify for a third class, and there may be some of your history that the FAA wants to delve a little deeper into, and they will ask more of that for a first class, more of that history than they will for a third class. Sometimes that deep dive into your medical background can slow down the process, and some students have to wait 12 to 18 months to get approved for that medical certificate. This is rare, but I just like to point it out that it can happen. So it's better to do it at the beginning end of your training than at the end of your training. There's on the slide, it's listed, and then also in the document that we gave you. If you just go to flightphysical.com, you can put in your zip code and it will give you medical examiners in your area. So we recommend that you go ahead and do that. And then the next part of that documentation just talks about TSA requirements. And as a student at a flight school, even if you've been training at another flight school, you have to have a TSA check at each new flight school. So just be prepared to bring that those certificates that are listed, those required certificates. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the airport, which we've touched on before, but just to give you guys some information, if you're in Jacksonville and you're able to go to Craig Airport, L3 is available to give tours Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. This is the address, and then the packet also has directions from campus. We strongly encourage you guys to go out there and have a tour. You don't need to make an appointment. You don't need to let them know that you're coming ahead of time. They will always have someone available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and they're happy to talk to prospective students and show you guys around. So we definitely encourage you all to do that. And then the last section that we're going to go over in the packet is the flight cost sheet. So there's a few things I want to touch on with the flight cost sheet. One of the things is that it says in your packet, it says fall 2024. We had a price increase this fall, and we anticipate a second price increase next fall. And the reason for that is that we just hadn't had a price increase in almost 5 years. So we had a slight price increase this fall. We have a slight price increase next fall. Typically, our price increase happens about every 2 to 3 years, and it's not huge. It's just a small percentage, but I always like to let you all know that that is coming. Another thing is, if you're looking at the page in your packet, the way that our flight courses are broken down is kind of by the years. So if you take a look at it over the course of the 4 years, you would do private pilot, lab A and B your first year, instrument, lab A and B your second year, then commercial multi-engine and commercial single would be your third year, and then flight instructor and flight instructor instrument would be your fourth year. As I mentioned before, you can go through it at a more rapid pace. You don't have to spread it out over those 4 years, the flight training, but you can. So it's kind of up to you. But I like to point that out so that if you decide to do your flight training at a little bit faster pace, then the cost for each of those labs will, expect that cost not just at the start of each semester. That cost will need to be paid as you're moving on through each of those flight labs. A couple of things about the cost of the flight labs. The number that you see listed is not necessarily the exact number that you will pay. The number that is listed is what you pay when you register for the lab. And we come up with that number based on the average amount of time it takes a typical student to get through those lessons. If you're flying, no pun intended, through those lessons and going really quickly, and you get to the end of those lessons and you have funds remaining, then those funds roll over to that next flight lab. The opposite can also be true if you're taking a little bit more time, things are going kind of slowly, it's just not clicking for you, you get to the end of your funds and you still have lessons remaining, then you'll have to add more funds to your account to finish up that flight lab. The funds, this is one thing I also like to point out, the funds are charged to your JU account, and then those funds are passed directly to L3. So the flight fees are charged like tuition, and that money is passed on directly. L3 doesn't take, or I'm sorry, JU doesn't take any money off the top. They don't charge any extra, but the benefit to them, it being charged to JU and then passed to L3, is that you can pay those flight costs just like you would pay tuition. So whether that's through a loan or a 529 plan, you're able to pay your flight costs that way. And then one last thing I like to point out on just when we're talking about flight costs, and I've kind of mentioned this a few different times, I'd just like to talk about what our academic year looks like, because it's a little different than some universities. And you may want to know what it looks like if you want to fly all year, or if you want to fly a little bit extra. So our fall semester starts early. This year it started August 19th, but it also ends pretty early. Our fall semester wraps up this year, November 26th, so finals and everything are complete before Thanksgiving. And then students are not back on campus until spring term, which starts January 13th and goes through May 2nd. We do have a winter term that started a few years ago, and the winter term starts the Monday after Thanksgiving. So this year it's December 2nd, and it runs through January 12th. So if students are interested, they are able to fly throughout that time. they can fly in the winter term, and it's a great opportunity to get more flying in. There's not as many students on campus that are flying, so it allows students to get a little bit more flight time in if they would like to fly. Or for example, say you come, you're working on your private pilot and you're finished with Lab A and it's November 1st and you want to continue your flight training. Well, that's something you can talk to us about, and we'll have a conversation with you. And if you would like to continue your flight training, then we would encourage you to do that, and to register for Lab B in that fall term, and then you can continue your flight training into the winter term. That's one of the nice things about the flight labs, is that it's not like a typical class where you have to wait till the beginning of a semester to register. You can register for those flight labs throughout the semester. Students can then fly, in the winter term. The winter term is pretty flexible. Students can remain in their housing in the residential halls. There's no extra charge for that. And then if they opt in for a meal plan, that's not mandatory, that's optional, but they can opt in for a meal plan during that time. And then we have quite a few students who also stay and fly in the summer. The summer term starts right after the spring term ends, so early May, and then we have 2 7-week sessions. And students can fly, as much or as little of the summer as they would like. But again, we don't have as many students doing flight training, so it's a great opportunity to get a lot of flying in. Or say you're finishing up your private pilot and you've only got a few more lessons left to finish, we would strongly encourage the students to stay into the summer to finish that private pilot rating before they went home and came back in the fall. So I think that's about it for all of the information that I have for all of you. I've been talking quite a bit, so I'm happy to open it up to questions if anyone has any questions. Maddie, I don't know. I haven't seen any questions pop up as we've been talking.
Yeah, Christine, thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information. I did drop the link for the aviation packet in the chat, as well as the link to find a medical certificate to find a physician that can perform that evaluation. Does anybody have any questions? There's none in the Q&A right now, but we will hang out for a minute or two for any questions to come in. But I do think, Christine, that you answered a lot of questions that I had, so I'm sure the families in the chat are feeling the same.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm glad to hear that. That's good. Well, I feel like I talked maybe a little too much. But
No, not at all. You provided great information. Captain Tui, do you have anything that you'd like to add while we're waiting on questions?
Yes, while we wait on questions, if there are any, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this. I think as you start your search for, or you continue your search for where you're going to pursue an collegiate aviation career, to embark on an absolutely spectacular career and opportunities that are unprecedented these days, it's important that you get as much information as you can. And the more universities you talk to, you're going to find there are a lot of similarities between procedures and type, Part 141 flight training and that sort of thing. I mean, there's only one way to do it properly, and most universities will do it that way. The difference, I think, as I go around to our fellow ABI accredited Aviation Accreditation Board international schools, is just the culture of the universities, the feel of the place, and the size, and how you interact with the people you're there, and you really should find the place that you think you're going to be most successful. We are a relatively large program in a small university. However, in collegiate aviation, we're a relatively small program. So, to use the fishing analogy, you're a bigger fish in a smaller pond here. Whereas you go to some of the much bigger university programs, you're a much smaller fish in a bigger pond. So a couple of things I'll warn you, as a JU graduate myself, if you come to JU to be anonymous, you're going to be disappointed because we're just not big enough for you to be anonymous. You know, you're going to be involved. You're going to get to know your faculty members. You know, I told this story 4 times during our Dolphin Days this past weekend with Maddie, that I graduated from JU a very long time ago when your grandparents were teenagers. And when I came back 27 years later after the Navy, there were still 5 professors that were here when I was an undergrad that I had known and maintained a relationship with, but I only had 2 of them in class. I met the other 3 just by being on campus, and that's kind of the way that JU operates. And I think that we've been able to continue that through the years, even though we've grown. The other thing I'll warn you is flying is awesome. And no matter where you go, flight training is not awesome. Flight training can be a lot of work. And there's a lot of moving parts. You know, you're going to be living away from home for the first time. You're going to be taking college classes, which are different than high school classes. You know, you're going to be the one that decides if and when you get up and go to class in the morning, if and when you ever do your laundry, and where you go to eat, and that type of thing. So to be in a program that has has the support system that we do for you, I think is very, very important. So having said that, the other thing I will tell you is that you were very, very lucky to have Captain Hughes give this presentation today, as opposed to me when she's not around. People end up with me. And she said she talked for a long time. I really talked for a long time. Really as interesting as she is. So again, I will again give you my thanks for joining tonight. And I'm sure Maddie has given you the options for getting a hold of us. So if you have more questions after this evening, please don't hesitate to ask them. Thank you.
We do have one question in the Q&A that I think I can answer, and then if Christine, you want to add anything to this, feel free to. Somebody asked about summer housing. In terms of summer housing, you can pay for housing over the summer through Res Life. I'm not sure of the fee off the top of my head, but if you send me an email, I can definitely give you that information. You can also live off campus for the summer. A lot of students do choose to do that, whether it's an apartment or a house with friends, etc. And then the third option is that some of the campus jobs do pay for summer housing. So if you had a summer job on campus, some of those do pay for JU campus housing. So that is an option as well. Christine, do you have anything to add to that?
Going to add that there's as I mentioned, there's 2 summer sessions, so you can do housing in that same way. So you can either just have this first 7 weeks of the summer or the second 7 weeks, or you can do the entire summer. And we actually just had a conversation with Residential Life about trying to even change that a little bit more for our aviation students. So stay tuned on that. But yes, those are definitely options. So you don't have to stay for the entire summer. You could just do the first part, or you just do the second part.
Awesome. We had 2 questions come in about the application process. I just want to reiterate to everybody, I did type it, but there is no additional application. Once you have been admitted to the university, you are also admitted to aviation or any major of your choosing. The only thing you have to do to, as Christine mentioned, secure that spot is place the $500 deposit, which you can do on your application portal. I do highly, highly encourage you to speak with your admissions counselor before putting that deposit though. And then Christine, real quickly, do freshmen have to take a refresher course if they come in with their PPL?
No, and that's a great question. So if a student arrives with their PPL, the student goes immediately into instrument. So you would start with instrument flight lab A, which is AVO 213, and then instrument ground school, which is AVS 202. And then once you have completed your instrument rating at JU, then you're awarded credit for your private pilot. So you're awarded 7 academic credits, 3 for the private pilot ground school and 2 for each of the private pilot flight labs. So you're saving some in tuition. Obviously, you've paid for your private pilot license somewhere else. So it's not like it's a true freebie, but it saves you a little bit in tuition if you do arrive with your private complete. One thing I would like to say just briefly on that is that if you are planning to obtain your private pilot certificate before you arrive on campus, aim to have that private pilot certificate completed by May before you arrive in August, which I know sounds way far ahead of time. But in the summertime, it is difficult. It's difficult right now to get an FAA designated pilot examiner to give you a check ride because there's not that many throughout the country. They're limited. But in the summertime, especially those DPEs, as we call them, they take vacation and and then that's also the most popular time to take a check ride. So it's very difficult to get in. And this fall, for example, we had 21 students that intended to come with their private pilot certificate and they were not able to get a check ride. So they had done their training and were ready for their check ride and couldn't get a check ride. And so they had to start then with us this fall as a private pilot lesson 1, day 1. Now, you don't lose your flight time. That stays in your logbook. That's your experience, but you do lose, that's a big investment that you're having to make twice. So we just encourage students that if you plan to get that PPL, that you do that ahead of time, and really plan to have that done before the summer even starts so that you're not getting too tight. I see this question about DPEs on staff. We have 3 check rides that we do in-house. So, but we do not have any DPEs on staff per se. So students do check rides with L3 for their private pilot, their instrument rating, and then their flight instructor rating. But for their commercial multi, their commercial single, and their flight instructor instrument, they do it with a DPE. We have DPEs that we use, the flight school uses. So there's a few for each of those ratings that the students are scheduled with, but they're not on staff of L3. I think that about covers it.
Awesome. Well, we will wrap up. Thank you so much, Christine and Captain Tui, for joining us tonight, and all of the attendees. Great questions. I did drop those documents as well as my email in the chat. I like to say that I'm our resident aviation expert in the office, and have a very close relationship with both Christine and Captain Tui. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, and I am happy to connect you with either the aviation department or your admissions counselor to have further conversations, whether it is about aviation specific questions or about making that next step to deposit at JU. I appreciate you all being here tonight, and have a great rest of your evening. If you have any questions, I look forward to hearing from you more soon.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you, everybody.